In this video, I want to talk about the almighty Wacky rigged Senko. This is by far one of the very most popular baits out there on the market. Whether you are just getting into bass fishing or you have been bass fishing your entire life, this is a technique that we all pick up from time to time, and we're able to go out there and catch a lot of fish. Now, there are three really important tips that I have when it comes to a Wacky rig that I want to talk about in this video. But real quick, before we get into the video, this one is brought to you by my apparel company, Fin Fishing. Guys, right now I'm running a sale for the month of April. So for another couple of weeks, if you buy one of my USA made sun shirts, which is one of the only ones out there on the market, you will get a free Fin Fishing rod glove. I have rod gloves that are spinning rods, for bait casting rods. All you got to do is add the sun shirt to cart, add the rod glove that you like to cart. It will automatically discount at checkout. It is the best way to help support this channel. All right, let's talk about the Wacky rig. We all love Wacky rigs. Now, the first thing that I want to talk about is actually how you work this bait. And this is something you may have heard about or may have experienced in the past, and it may be something that you've never heard about, because a lot of us think that when we go out and fish that Wacky rig, that all we're gonna do is cast that bait out and let it fall. And that works a lot, all right? That works a lot. You know, whether I'm skipping that bait underneath of a dock, underneath of an overhanging tree, or even just placing it next to an object that I can see with my own eyes, just letting it fall and letting that bait really do its own thing, that is a phenomenal way to catch a lot of fish on it. But one of my absolute favorite ways to fish that Wacky rigged Senko style bait is actually very similar to the way that I work a floating worm technique, where I'm actually gonna cast this bait out and I'm gonna let it fall just about a half a foot or so below the surface. And then I'm actually gonna reel up my line and I'm gonna pump that bait a couple times just to kind of make it go like kind of pulse in the water, and then let it sink about another half a foot or foot under the water. And then I'm gonna just keep doing that, repeating that all the way back to the boat. So you're actually able a lot of times to see the Wacky rig the entire time that you are fishing it this way. If you look at some of the best Wacky rig fishermen in the world, one, for example, is David Dudley. He's a professional fisherman. This is something that I really kind of learned watching some of his videos, is that he works a Wacky rig a lot in this manner, where he's letting that bait only fall about a foot below the surface and then actually pumping it across like just below the surface. And the best thing about working it this way is it is a very exciting bite. You can see the fish kind of come up there and visibly get the bait. It is so much fun. And again, it's just something that not everyone is doing, so it can help you to get more bites. Now, something that I've kind of done over the years is kind of done both of kind of the original way you work this bait as well as working it quickly in the same cast. So a lot of times when I make a cast, I might like pick out my object. Maybe it's a stump, maybe it's just underneath of a dock. I'm gonna cast it out there. I'm gonna let that bait fall to the bottom. If I don't get bit, I'm gonna start reeling that bait till it's just below the surface and then start pumping it below the surface. A lot of times you would be surprised how many days you do not get bit on the fall, but you will get bit when you start working that bait just below the surface. Sometimes there's just days on the water where bass prefer something to be moving away from them. It's kind of that whole cat and mouse game. We talked about this a couple of days ago as well, but that movement upwards and away from them really triggers them, because that's a lot of times what prey are gonna do in the water. You know, a bait fish, if they see a bass coming at them, they're not just gonna sink to the bottom. They're gonna try to get away from that fish. And so that really triggers that innate response from a bass, and it can help you catch a lot more fish. Now, the second thing that I wanna talk to you about is the actual worm itself. Now, when I said the Senko in the beginning of this video, I was really talking about any kind of stick bait that is out there on the market, soft plastic stick baits. Now, the Gary Yamamoto Senko was really the original, but literally every single brand out there, every single fishing brand makes their own Senko style bait. And the thing that you should know about all these baits is they are actually all very different. And some of them are going to be jam loaded with salt. For example, the Gary Yamamoto bait, it has a lot of salt in it. That's why it's a heavy bait. That's why it sinks and has that motion that it does. But if you look at baits like a Yum Dinger, doesn't have a lot of salt in it. And a Yum Dinger actually floats really high, and it has a lot slower sink rate than a Senko. So all these baits are extremely different. And I think, you know, there's going to be days out there where it just doesn't matter what you throw, the bass are going to eat it. But there are days where bass do like a slower sink rate, or they do like a faster sink rate, or they do like to have an action that is incorporated in one bait over another. So to me, I always keep some different brands, whether that's a Berkeley General, a Senko, of course, the Dinger. I mean, we could go on and on. I think, like I said, every brand makes one. Now, this isn't going to help any of my actual sponsors, but I do want you guys to know that one of the best Senko style baits out there on the market is actually the Bass Pro Shops Sticko. Now, if you look at the Sticko and the Senko in the water, they have almost the exact same fall rate. They have almost the exact same motion, but that Bass Pro Shop Sticko is actually a lot less expensive, which is nice for us because, you know, Senkos are like $8, $9, $10, depending on where you get them. That Bass Pro Shop Sticko has that very similar sink rate, but again, a lot less expensive. It's one of the baits that I carry with me. There's also a few colors that they have in the Sticko that they don't actually have in a Senko, believe it or not, that I really like. So anyways, guys, it's a great little bait, but the whole point of this point is that all these baits are a little bit different. So you should kind of test them out, see what you like. Maybe that's a video that I'll do over on Bass Fishing HQ in the future. Now, the third thing that I want to talk about is do not be afraid to use heavy cover on your to use heavy equipment with your Wacky rig. This is something that, you know, I think probably 10 out of 10 people throw a Wacky rig on a spinning rod, right? And I think that we should all throw them on spinning rods. But with that being said, do not be afraid to use a little bit heavier equipment when it comes to your line configuration and your hook. And this is something that I think is really important, and it's something that a lot of guys don't take into consideration when you go out there on the water. And the thing is that, to me, there are days on the water. I mean, a bass is almost going to bite a Senko all the time, but a lot of times it doesn't matter how big a line you are using. The bass just likes the way that that bait falls, or if you're working it really fast, like we talked about earlier, it really doesn't matter what size line you use. So me, I like to use braid to fluorocarbon. You know, that is what I've always done. But the thing is I am not afraid to use heavier fluorocarbon than most people probably think. Yeah, a lot of times I might use 8 or 10 pound test if I think the bass are really line shy. But a lot of times when I'm fishing a Wacky rig up shallow, around a lot of cover, maybe boat docks, wherever it may be, I'll put on 15 pound fluorocarbon. I've put 20 pound fluorocarbon before on a Wacky rig as my leader in the past because of where I was fishing it and the size of the fish that I was fishing for. There have been times where I know I'm fishing for really big ones and they're around heavy cover, but the Wacky rig is the best way to catch these fish. So do not be afraid to fish a little bit heavier line on your spinning rod. Now, with that being said, it's really important that you have the right hook with your Wacky rig, because if you have a really finessey hook and you have that heavier line, even with a spinning rod, you can still bend out a hook a little bit. Now, there's kind of a double-edged, well, I wouldn't even say there's a double-edged sword of this. There's two actually good reasons to use a little bit heavier hook that you might not always think about. One is if you're using heavy line, you want a little bit of a heavier, and I'm not saying a really heavy hook, I'm really just saying a little bit thicker diameter hook. Instead of using like almost a drop shot hook as your Wacky rig, just use one that is a little bit thicker in diameter. You know, an octopus hook, for example, I don't necessarily love some of the octopus hooks on the market, but they do tend to be a little bit thicker, so they can be a little bit better and a little bit stronger. Now, the other thing is, if you're using a thicker diameter hook on your Wacky rig versus a thinner diameter hook, you are going to lose by far a lot less worms when you are skipping that bad boy. Now, if you use O-rings, this really isn't going to apply to you, but if you're like me, I just like to take my hook, shove it through that worm, and start going about my day. In using a little bit thicker in diameter hook, you will lose substantially less worms when you go to cast them. You're not gonna sit there and make a cast and that worm just goes flying anymore. You will only lose them once those baits really get eaten a lot by bass. So those are kind of my tips when it comes to Wacky Rig. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Don't forget to check out that fin gear, and if you like these videos, you might like this one right here. I will see you guys tomorrow.